Welcome to the Audrey Hall Show. I'm your host, Audrey Hall. We're all feeling it, the rising cost of living, a job market in flux, and growing uncertainty about what the future holds. So how did we get here and where might we be headed, especially here in Massachusetts and the Metro West region? Two guests today will help us sort through these big questions. And we're joined first by Dr. Mary Burke, a leading voice in regional economic analysis. Dr. Burke is a principal economist and policy advisor with the New England Public Policy Center in the research department at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. She has years of experience studying economic trends that directly affect our region, and today she's here to share her observations and insights into the forces shaping our local economy and what they might mean for all of us. So welcome, Mary. It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I'm delighted to be here.
You bring so much expertise on these critical topics that are affecting everybody, and there's very little real solid information out there to help average people understand what's going on. So I'm hoping that maybe in our discussion, you can start off today with a look at the big picture. Like, how would you actually describe the current state of the economy here in Massachusetts and even in the Metro West region?
Sure. We're in basically a slow growth economy. We're not yet in a recession, hopefully not about to be in a recession, but we're in a very slow growth mode. And the economy also could sort of be described as a two-speed economy, and it's very uneven. So you might look at the overall picture and say, oh, Massachusetts growth and GDP growth in Massachusetts is between 1% and 2%. In recent quarters. So that seems like a decent, kind of consistent with long run growth trends. Massachusetts, probably it's a little bit below average. But what that kind of masks is that the economy is being supported by very large investments by a small number of very large companies. This is, more at the aggregate national level, but I would say this applies to Massachusetts as well, is, spending by large, well-capitalized businesses is driving what's the overall growth, and also spending by the wealthiest consumers. So, both business spending and consumer spending are what shows up in overall economic growth, but both of those are being supported by the top of the distribution. And if you think of just about consumers, recent research by Moody's Analytics, this is again at the national level, but the top 10% of households in terms of income accounting for more than 50% of all consumer spending.
Whoa, so you said two things I want to go a little deeper on. First, you mentioned two-speed economy. Is that what you said, two-speed?
Yes.
What does that actually mean?
So it means that for wealthier households, the economy, they feel pretty good about their position. So say their credit card balances are below where they were before the pandemic. With stock market performing so well, their asset wealth is high. The housing prices went up. If you're a homeowner, your wealth position is pretty good because the value of your house has gone up a lot. And that tends to translate into consumers feeling more comfortable spending money. And there has been decent income growth. The pandemic was obviously a time of great disruption. It did actually benefit lower income households with strong wage growth, but that has since kind of reversed. So, and there were a lot of income supports throughout the pandemic. So there were these forces kind of minimizing the income inequality during the pandemic, but that has kind of petered out because the income supports have gone away. And so now you see, like I said, that the people at the top are benefiting from all of the rises in house prices and asset prices, and the people at the bottom who aren't asset owners. And now wage growth has slowed at the bottom. And then with all the cumulative price inflation, it is really stretching the budgets of the people at the bottom. So by two-speed, meaning like people in the top of the distribution doing well, able to afford what they need, and people at the bottom just no longer being able to, struggling very much to make ends meet. You hear about people having to even think very hard about which of the necessities they can afford. There's greater demand for support from food banks and other forms of social assistance.
Have we been in that situation before?
Yes, this is not the first time, for sure. There's always income discrepancies and discrepancies in people's...
To this degree of that two-speed economy?
Yeah, I mean,
have you seen it before?
I think it's hard for me to say that this is historically the most, the most disparate outcomes we've ever seen, but I would say relative to where we were 3 years ago, for sure.
Is there
more
a risk
unequal.
with it being like that? You know, in terms of long term, what happens if it continues along that trajectory?
People are definitely concerned about if this tips worse in the labor market. So where we are in the labor market, let me talk about that, is job growth is still positive, but very slow.
Is that one of the key economic indicators?
Yes. So say increase in payroll employment growth has been about less than 1%, maybe 0.5% on net relative to where jobs were before the pandemic. So, you know, we're just barely above the number of jobs we had before the pandemic, but there's more people out there in the labor force.
Okay.
So job growth very slow. A lot of that, as you talked about, the uncertainty. Firms are worried about taking on workers because if you don't know where the economy's going, you don't feel comfortable hiring because then you have people on your payroll and nobody's buying your stuff. So job growth is weak and wage growth is slowing, especially at the bottom. And if people can only just barely afford the basic necessities and then they get put out of a job, then you can get unemployment benefits, but it's typically not going to pay you as much. And so then you're just not going to be able to afford your house, your utility bills, your grocery bills. And that's when people have to start to turn to social assistance.
Seems like there's a top and a bottom and not a middle right now, from what, kind of what you're saying in terms of.
There is a middle, but I would just say that the top of the distribution of households is doing a disproportionate share of the spending, more so than, say, a few years ago.
It's interesting because you wonder how long that can continue, and you wonder, with the jobs, as you were just saying, with those indicators, what this means in terms of recovery out of that situation.
Wealthy households start feeling less economically secure. If people in those households start losing their jobs and they stop spending, then the engine for the rest of the economy is gone.
Right. Now, you said jobs is one of the key economic indicators. So in terms of other key economic indicators that you're watching really closely right now, what are they telling you and what are they?
So I think there's sort of a levels versus where we're headed. And if you think about, so I looked at the unemployment rates for a lot of cities and towns in the Metro West area, and the good news is they're kind of below the overall unemployment rate in the state of Massachusetts. They range from a low of, say, 3.7% unemployment rate in Natick to a high of 4.4% in Hopkinton. So these are relatively moderate, low, what seemingly healthy unemployment rates.
What's
the overall
national
state, in the state it's 4.8%.
Okay.
So, this region, Metro West, has a really strong and diverse employment base. And that means, and it also has a relatively educated population, and that means that the unemployment rates are going to tend to be below average. And we're not seeing massive layoffs yet. We're just seeing people not hiring. There has been a problem of if people do lose the job, because that just happens naturally, there's a certain amount of churn, it's taking people longer and longer to find a new job. So the longer you're out of work, then that can obviously creates financial strain on the family, even if you have some unemployment assistance. But then the longer you're out of the labor market, it can make it ever harder to get back in. You lose
a lot
skills.
Of people feel that.
Employers say, what have you been doing out of the labor market for so long, even though, people might have been looking very, very hard for a job.
Tough situation for
yeah.
sure.
But, as I said, right now, at least in terms of levels, the unemployment rates look contained, but there's this sense of fragility of, is it going to tip into suddenly employers are like, well, wait a minute, I don't need all these employees. And, it's one of these psychological circles where if people stop spending money, then the firms need to lay off workers. It's a circular situation. Mm-hmm. So there's just a lot of uncertainty. I think we've continued to grow. The economy has continued to grow for longer than some people had been predicting. So there's a little bit of a puzzle. Some people are like, how is this still going on? But a lot of it, as I said, is a lot of households still in a very strong financial position, willing to spend money, and then businesses interested in making investments related to AI is also driving a lot of that. That can drive hiring for certain roles. It can drive their spending, building AI infrastructure. And this is also being promoted. There's an initiative in Massachusetts being promoted an AI hub to try to help firms build infrastructure and help them train their workforce for these AI-related jobs.
Well, you know, while that's all happening, regardless of that, people are indeed feeling the sting of higher prices, no matter whether at the higher level or the lower level of income right now. They're feeling it in groceries, their housing costs, energy costs are huge right now and going up. You know, what's driving this persistent inflation, and is there any relief in sight?
That is a huge question.
It is, it really is.
We're still dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic. So the pandemic was a massive, obviously once in a lifetime disruption. And there were a lot of changes in people's spending patterns and a lot of changes in the types of housing that people were desiring. And especially in the region, we haven't been able to build enough housing to keep up with increases in demand. And so I noticed that the per capita median income in the Metro West area is about 1.5 times the US average. So you think, okay, great, this is a relatively well-off place. People should be able to afford housing. But the median home value in the metro area here is more than double the US median home value.
It's all relative, right?
It's all relative. You know, somebody might say, but you make so much more money, but if the house costs twice as much and you're only making 1.5 times as more, it's gonna be harder to afford the same house in this area. So that's a big strain, and a lot of it is, it's harder to build here. It can just be a challenge to build enough housing relative to the demand.
Right.
So I think that's the biggest source because housing is such a large share of people's budgets.
And I'm just wondering if there's any end in sight for the inflation, because the prices go up weekly.
So
especially in the grocery area.
This is why I don't want to focus on interest rates too much here, but they have been high to help contain inflation.
Okay.
So that was, that had been working. So the inflation rate had been coming down out of the pandemic. So there was a sense of inflation returning to normal. We never have zero. We'll very, very rarely have zero inflation. And again, wages should typically be able to keep up with sort of a moderate level of inflation. But now there has been other disruptions in the economy that have been pushing inflation a little bit higher again. Such as tariffs, as well as health insurance costs rising a lot. That has been a big factor, and that's just another set of costs that are very difficult to contain. There's longer term demographic pressures on these things. So a lot of these are just really unwieldy problems.
Do you think that inflation isn't affecting different sectors or in the region, or different communities in the region differently? Are some areas faring better than others?
We don't measure it at such a granular level.
Okay.
I would say that inflation in the New England area has been above the US average in the past several months. And I think most of that has been, again, because housing prices have been rising at a faster rate here. The good news actually is that the rate of house price appreciation has been slowing a lot. And actually in, I think, the second quarter, house prices actually fell outright in a lot of areas, I think including in the Boston metro area. So if you're a homeowner, you don't like it when your house price falls, but if you're trying to buy a new house, you want house prices to come down, or at least you want them to start rising, not as rapidly. So house prices, I would say, are moving in the right direction. A lot of that has been just weaker sales, weaker demand, higher interest rates. So that should be good news for people looking to buy a house. In terms of other sources of prices, again, I think the biggest problem is just how it impacts different households differently in terms of whether your wages are keeping up. And as I said, coming out of the pandemic, these lower income households were actually seeing some of the strongest wage growth because they were doing in-person jobs that were in demand and needed to be compensated to be doing the jobs that other people didn't want to do.
Right.
But really since sometime in 2024, the job growth at the lower end has slowed. And so now it's less likely that those incomes
well, that's
are
what
keeping up.
I was going to ask you about that. So thanks for mentioning that, because we're hearing about a cooling job market. So do you think there are any labor shortages in Massachusetts?
Yes, we definitely hear from employers. So, when you hear about, in general, job demand cooling, there's a lot fewer job openings than there were in 2022. And it's easier for a lot of people to find workers because the unemployment rate has drifted up, even though it's still low. we do hear from a lot of employers saying, I can't find skilled workers, mechanics, technical jobs, precision manufacturing, electricians. And so there's actually, I think they're starting to see some movement, which is exciting to me, of increased demand for vocational education, where people are starting to get the signal that, wait a minute, maybe if I go to a 4-year college and I get out, maybe there's not a traditional, white collar job waiting for me anymore. Maybe I'm going to go into one of the skilled trades or get vocational education. It's going to take me less time, and look at the salary I can earn in these jobs, because a lot of employers are just really having a hard time finding these skilled workers.
Right. And we're hearing that there's some relief coming from the fact that Massachusetts has made the community college available for free to people who couldn't have gone before, maybe pursued some vocational education as well within that the community college environment. So that might help in terms of feeders into these types of jobs, but that will take some time. And in that case, wages in some sectors, maybe could be increasing. Are you seeing any gains in keeping pace with inflation in wages?
I know that I had looked at some data maybe 6 months ago where I said, in the New England region, so we have some of these data at the census region, we can see whether salaries have kept up. We have, index of real wage growth, which is wage growth controlling for inflation. And it had gotten negative for a while in the New England region, but then it had recently gone back up to in the positive, but just, still quite weak. And in fact, real wage growth was slower in the New England region than in some other parts of the country. So that was kind of an unfortunate indicator. And that was mainly because the inflation had gone back up in the region. So if the house price growth starts to continue to moderate, hopefully that situation will improve. But at the same time, the wage growth on average is slow. I think there are opportunities to be found in terms of, as I said, these jobs that are in demand, but people have to have the right training, and so it's going to take some investment. I do see more work happening in terms of employers, again, anecdotally, because we speak with individual companies, an employer saying they're going to set up an apprenticeship with a high school in their area to specifically train the workers that they need.
It sounds to me, though, that the housing market, because you've mentioned it several times already, is a key driver.
Yes.
What's driving the prices either up or down in this region? And you're saying they're tending to start moving a little bit down.
Yeah.
What are the key drivers for that?
So, basic supply and demand. This is a very desirable area to live in. There is this amazingly diverse economic base. There's a lot of desirable jobs here. There's desirable neighborhoods, safe, diverse. I'm fine with the climate. Not everybody always is. But, a lot of beautiful natural amenities in the area. So that makes it just very desirable place to live. But partly because it's an older area, already well developed, there's fewer open space within which to develop.
Is a big issue, yeah.
And then people are very invested in their quality of life, and they like the plots of land and the way the zoning is, and it can be hard to change these things because the existing homeowners don't want to change the character of a place, and that's understandable. So there can be a tension between the desire to provide new housing supply to meet the demand versus, maintaining the character of a place. So, ideally there's opportunities for, growth relative, closer to transit, and so you could have both dense areas and less dense areas that can kind of satisfy all the different needs.
Yes, I see that relative to and pertaining more to existing home sales. What about the prices of new homes?
We don't build that many homes. There are incentives for building houses more in the affordable range. It can be difficult to incentivize those. Construction costs have gone up a lot, so it's not actually just zoning. That's also related to inflation. So construction costs are high, interest rates are higher. That rises the cost of building new apartments. So then it's harder to build something that's going to fetch a low rent, because if the cost is so high, you want to build something that's going to be a high rent apartment or a high priced home. So unfortunately, the economics of it, even if you're building, it's less likely that people are going to build lower priced units. So those need to be, some kind of subsidy might help in those cases.
Do you see any relief in sight in the housing market overall?
Well, like I said, price growth is slowing. That doesn't mean prices are necessarily coming down, but in parts of the country where there has been more housing construction, the prices actually have fallen outright. And this is where a slowing economy can create opportunities because that puts less pressure on demand. So we have seen increases in home inventories, so more homes are being put on the market, and that's also very good for people looking for homes.
The whole supply and demand
Right,
impact.
so that is taking a little bit of pressure off the prices. But we've just been through such a period of extraordinary house price growth for so many years that people just see, oh wow, since 4 years ago the prices are up 60-70%. So that's just astonishing.
It really is.
So even some relief in terms of the growth or even a small reversal of that is still gonna, unfortunately, housing is still gonna be out of reach for certain segments of the population.
So let's look a little bit at the future, the outlook. Are there signs of a slowdown or recession, do you think, right now in the regional economy, or are we heading in a different direction?
I'm hesitant to call a recession. I would say that contacts that we talk to are just citing a lot of uncertainty, and they cite certain conditions that if there were more resolution of uncertainty, people might be willing to hire, businesses might be feeling more comfortable about hiring again. So part of it is this just a temporary strain on hiring? Is this just a pause? Because we actually saw the sentiment back in the spring was much more negative, actually, and firms were even more cautious. And then there was a little bit greater resolution about firms started to be able to see, okay, I think I see where these tariff rates are going to end up. I think I see a little bit more certainty. Businesses keep spending money. I feel a little bit more secure. And so there was some resumption of hiring. Like I said, we're still seeing some positive job growth, and unemployment rates are still pretty moderate. So I think if there were more resolution of uncertainty, then more businesses would feel comfortable getting back into the labor market and hiring. And as I said, consumer spending in the aggregate is still holding up. So there is the chance for improvement, I think, but the dynamic could obviously go the other way. So I think that's, we're just in an unusually uncertain moment right now.
It's definitely a major factor right now. I can see where you're weighing the options, and looking at all of that data and seeing that it could go in either way. So thank you for explaining that. What structural or long-term, I think this also speaks to the fact that there are structural and long-term trends that we should be paying attention to. You kind of mentioned a few of them already, but any others?
So the biggest one for our region is the demographics. So the aging population. We tend to have an older population, so the median age is a little bit higher here than in the US on the average. It's about 40 as opposed to closer to 39 for the US. That doesn't sound like a big difference, but we also have a much larger share of the population at retirement age. So what we've seen since before the pandemic is that labor force participation rates are down between 1% and 2%. And that's sort of what we would expect, actually, based on the demographics, but that also can be a problem. It's more than what happened in the US because the demographic change, the shift towards aging and the retirements have been more in the region based on our population.
You think it's helpful then to try to keep younger people in the region?
Yes.
And not just have it weighing heavy on the aging population.
Yes.
Okay, so that's a good thing to keep in mind, yeah?
Yeah, so can I mention, this sort of goes back to housing, so another sort of negative trend. I said this is a very desirable area, and yet if you look at people moving from state to state within the US, there's been negative migration out of Massachusetts. And the number one thing that people cite is the cost of living. And this is affecting, young families trying to start, So again, if you solve the housing piece, the demographic piece might follow.
Good point. What do you wish more people understood about the current economy that often gets lost in all the noise?
That we're not yet in a recession, but I do understand that for many families it might feel that we are.
And if you had one takeaway for workers and families trying to make sense of all of this, what would it be?
I think the hope is that there are these job opportunities, because as long as we're hearing employers saying we can't find workers with these skills, then it's really a matter of investment. So people teaming up and finding the way to attain the skills that employers are looking for. And I do see resources. You asked me about resources.
Yes.
Within the region. There are things such as, the Mass Bay, and I think Maura Mann would have more to say on this because she's an expert on this.
She's joining us shortly.
So the Mass Bay Community College, Framingham State University, both have programs for, say, obtaining certificates for highly skilled positions, behavioral health technologists, EMTs, auto repair, and some of these programs are free or grant-supported training. So they're actual free job training programs that provide certificates that ideally can convey the skills that some employers say are really in demand and could pay decent wages for. So I do see that there are opportunities. It's just a matter of people getting matched with the right resources. And that alone, that can also be a challenge because sometimes these things, the people perceive that they cost more money or it's a time investment and maybe, how are you going to support your family while you're in this training program? But I do think there are opportunities out there.
So that takeaway might be to start looking for some of those opportunities to either enhance skill sets, get new skills, and really retool for the current state of the economy, for the current job market, et cetera, in order to fare better and grow more in these uncertain times. Is that kind
Definitely.
of where you're going?
Even people on the job are having to acquire new skills because of the increased use of AI on jobs. So I think the labor market is moving very rapidly in terms of how qualifications are changing and skills and demand are changing. So everyone has to be on top of this situation, but there are resources out there.
Good to know.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You've provided us with a really great overview of some of the things that we're experiencing economically in the region, and it's, I'm sure, helpful to many to understand what's happening and maybe how they can adjust their lives in these times. So thank you for your expertise and for sharing all of that with us today.
Thanks, Audrey. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. A heartfelt thank you to Dr. Mary Burke for sharing her valuable insights and helping us better understand the forces that are shaping our local economy. Her perspective is not only timely, but essential. And stay with us because after this short break, I'm going to be joined by Maura Mann. She's the president of BankW Staffing, and she's going to explore what today's job market means for both employers and job seekers. So you won't want to miss that. We'll be right back.
Positive praise is at the heart of each parenting strategy from Boys Town. Visit boystown.org/praise to receive your 10 Ways to Praise magnet. It's a great reminder to catch them being good, and that great parenting advice is just a click away.
Joining me now is someone who knows the job market inside and out. Maura Mann is the president of BankW Staffing, where she leads 3 of the firm's key companies, the Nagler Group, KNF&T Staffing Resources, and Sales Search Partners. She was recently named to the Staffing Industry Analyst's Power 150 Women in Staffing list, a recognition that really speaks to her leadership and influence in the field. She is a passionate advocate for the staffing and recruiting industry across Massachusetts, and she's the president of the Massachusetts Staffing Association. So with her finger firmly on the pulse of both job seekers and employers, she brings a vital perspective to today's conversation about the regional economy, workforce trends, and what lies ahead. So welcome, Maura.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure, and we've got so much to talk about. I really want to start with taking advantage of the fact that you are in direct contact every day with employers and job seekers. So I'd like to know how you would describe the current state of the job market across the region.
It's interesting. It's really changed a lot over the last year. And the one thing I'd say to people is it's still a very good job market. Unemployment is still very low comparatively compared to other states and historically. But employers have become, we'll say, pickier as far as their hiring. You've seen processes get longer. They're really taking a closer look at applicants and deciding, does this person really fit well within my organization, and do I see them being with us for a long time?
That's very interesting. So I was going to ask you now what's changed most in the hiring landscape. So you see that as one of the changes. What else has changed in the hiring landscape over the past year?
I think economically, people are being more careful as far as spending. 2-3 years ago, we saw a lot of employers fast and furiously hiring. They were throwing out big salaries to people, sign-on bonuses, retention bonuses. A lot of those types of things have been scaled back. But this is an area with a very expensive cost of living. There's still good salaries, still benefits, because smart employers know they still have to offer those things to get the quality of talent that they want and that they need.
Mm-hmm. And so the landscape, how about the recruitment process and just the process of actually getting in the door? Has that changed over the last year?
Well, the hot topic, which I'm sure you've heard about, is AI. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a great thing, but it's also a frustrating thing to many people. As you see larger companies relying more on technology than human beings, it's really changed how job searches are happening. You hear a lot that people are sending in their resumes, and it's frustrating because they don't hear back. The resumes are being read by computers looking for keywords rather than human beings. I think that's where recruiters can come in and make change, because we're looking at the actual humans behind those resumes and making sure that the right people are getting matched to the right jobs in the right companies.
That's so important, and it brings the human element into the whole process, which can feel lonely and isolated when it is left to AI, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, human resources, there's a reason why the word human is in that.
Good point. Good point. So are companies still struggling, though, to find talent, or is there a talent, I'm hearing a talent shortage narrative, and I'm not sure if that really exists or not. So what do you see? Are they struggling to find talent? Is there talent? Is there a shortage?
Yes, there's definitely pockets where it's very, very hard to hire talent. One of the trends that we've seen is, especially with some of the more entry-level, lower-level positions, is that companies are having a very hard time hiring for those for a few reasons. One, you don't see students working as much. The demands of going to school and balancing extracurricular activities, it's become more and more over, say, the last 10 or 15 years. So the jobs that were once filled by high school and college students, many of those kids have scaled back. And so that leaves a lot of openings in the market. We've seen, as far as the immigrant population, of people who've voluntarily chosen to step back from the workforce because, frankly, they're afraid to go to work. So that has created some job openings. And then couple that with baby boomers who are retiring, many of whom were offered retirement packages during the pandemic and have stepped away from the workforce. There's definitely pockets where it's been much harder to hire.
When you put it all together like that, I see a whole different picture.
It's a very interesting puzzle as far as how things go, and it's ever changing.
First, I want to go back to what you said about young kids being so scheduled to the max that they're not working in high school or at younger ages, and that's affecting the job market as well to some degree. I'm wondering if that pressure from college, that's coming really from colleges that are kind of saying you have to do all of this or we won't even look at you, and so kids are doing all of that instead of working when they're in high school.
100% true. It's the starting to build the resume earlier and earlier. And when I say resume, I don't mean a work resume. That I'm a mom, I have a high school student, and it's amazing in some of the college groups, the stats that are expected to get into good colleges, as well as the range of activities, from the amount of hours doing community service work, to being 3-sport athletes, to starting clubs. It's really never ending, and you see some of these kids go from the early morning hours until very late at night.
It's having an impact everywhere, and really being driven by the colleges. Maybe that can change over time or not.
We'll see. That's interesting because it's so much different than 15, 20 years ago.
It really
I think
is.
The internet has, everybody's looking at colleges online. There's a big push to the big southern schools, and everybody's looking at yield of how can they get the right kids who are going to accept the acceptances, and of course the skyrocketing tuition rates.
Yeah.
We are lucky in Massachusetts, though. We have so many excellent colleges within a small radius.
And we now offer free college at a lot of community colleges and opportunities, not just for people who can make it to some of the big schools. So I think that's really attractive and helpful as well. But then you also mentioned the boomers, the baby boomers who took retirement packages or even have delayed retirement or don't want to even think about working, and if they are, they want to work very selectively. What do you see the impact of that being?
Well, it's interesting because I mentioned people taking retirement packages during COVID, but now we're starting to see some of those people come back into the workforce and say, wait a minute, I did retire from my career, but I'm not quite ready to hang my hat up just yet. So that's one of the things that we're working with people on is, what does that look like? Is that doing consulting work, contract work, per diem kind of work? There's a lot of different options out there, and it's actually fantastic because for many companies, it's being able to get somebody that frankly has, maybe in some cases is overqualified, but wants to come in, they want to use their skills, and they can offer great value to organizations.
Good point, very good point. Let's talk for a minute about the impact of the immigrant community on the workforce right now. You did mention that.
I did.
Can we go into more detail?
Well, it's interesting because as president of Massachusetts Staffing Association, I'm in touch with not just the staffing firms that I run, but with staffing firms all over the Commonwealth. And one thing I'm hearing over and over and over again, especially in light industrial and manufacturing, is that they're having such a hard time finding workers, and that many of the workers that they were placing previously were in the immigrant community. And we've been trying to dig in and figure out, why is this? And we do feel that you watch the news and that there's segments of the population that are frankly afraid to go out to work. They want to, but they just don't feel that it's in their best interest right now.
Well, that's different than it was a few years ago. And I'm curious what else for job seekers is different today than it was a few years ago, whether it's fear, pay, flexibilities, culture, benefits. What are you seeing that's different now?
I think the flexibility is one of the biggest things that we've seen that has changed a little bit over the last couple of years. Obviously, when COVID happened, all of a sudden companies that never thought about doing work from home before said, well, this is what we're going to do. Everybody's going to work from home. And obviously there's industries that couldn't do that, things like healthcare. But we saw many companies move to fully remote operating models. And then over the course of the last few years, most of those companies have switched over to a hybrid model, which in office, starting out, it was 1 or 2 days a week. Now we're seeing more and more companies with 3 or 4 days a week in office. And if you've driven on 128 or on the Mass Pike lately, there's definitely an increase in traffic, which sort of echoes that people are back in offices and they're doing commutes. In fact, I think companies are offering more flexibility, but that commute now, you have to be on the highway at 1:30 not to hit traffic versus it used to be 3:30, 4 o'clock.
The rush hours have changed. They're very different and unpredictable. You have to be where you want to be by 2 o'clock, or else you're in rush hour.
100%. Yeah. And the other thing that we've seen is we continue to see job seekers come in, and I understand it. Everybody wants flexibility, especially when many people had it during the pandemic, of where are the remote jobs? I want remote. Can you find me a remote job? And unfortunately, those have been tougher and tougher to come by lately. Like I said, many companies have chosen a hybrid model where there is some flexibility for working from home or doing some sort of flex hours, which is fantastic. But as far as fully remote work goes, one of the trends that we're seeing is that Massachusetts, in the Northeast overall, is not an ideal place for remote workers because houses are expensive here. Daycare is expensive here. The cost of living overall is just frankly more expensive than other parts of the country. So when companies are offering work from home roles, they're not just getting a portion of applicants within, what's a reasonable commute, a 20 or 30 mile radius. They're getting applicants from all over the country. So what happens is somebody in the greater Boston area is looking for work. They're looking for X salary. Somebody in Tulsa applies to that same position. As a general rule, they're looking for, in some cases, 30 to 40% less than someone in the Northeast. So if companies are shopping things out that way and looking to save a little bit of money, if skills and experience are similar and somebody's located in a part of the country with a lower cost of living versus a higher cost of living, that is most likely going to be the person that gets the job.
I didn't even think of that. That's very interesting. So the remote workforce is more competitive because employers can hire people who can work remote from areas where the cost of living is lower.
Far more competitive. When there is an ad posted for a fully remote job, we get thousands upon thousands of applicants versus when something's local and has a component of in-office, even if it's only a day a week or a day a month, it constricts the pool considerably.
Interesting.
So if someone's struggling to find work, and I know they love the flexibility of fully remote, but I would urge them to take a look at things that at least have some in-office time, because their resume is probably going to be a lot more visible versus in a system and in a pool of thousands of candidates.
Excellent advice. And most people may not even be aware of that level of competition and the need to be more ready to go into the workplace rather than stay or seek something that's partially or fully hybrid, fully remote. So thank you for sharing that. Do you see that people are still switching jobs at high rates, or do you see like a return to staying put?
People will always switch jobs. There will always be opportunity out there. And I think that's up for each individual to decide. Where is career development taking them? Are they in the right place at the right time? And I think that's a very important thing, because the job that's right for somebody today might not be the right job 2, 3, 4 years down the line. So we encourage people to always keep their eyes and ears open as far as what's out there in the market. Being a recruiter, many of the candidates that we work with are passive candidates, and that can be one of the advantages for an employer to working with a staffing firm versus just posting an ad online and looking on their own, is we know the people that say, well, I'm not really looking right now, but if something came along and it had X, Y, and Z, I'd love to hear about it. So
those are your passive candidates?
Absolutely our passive candidates. But I mean, there's always people looking around because benefits cost change. A lot of information out there right now about skyrocketing healthcare costs. So people are always looking to put themselves in a different situation. And then there's employers always looking to add talent to organizations.
Are there particular industries or roles where the demand right now is especially high, or where things have really slowed down?
Well, we're industry agnostic, and we place a lot of different types of roles, and it seems to be in pockets. Legal right now is very, very hot. We are working on a lot of attorney roles, paralegal, litigation support positions throughout the entire region. So that has stayed strong. Accounting and finance, through our sister company, has been very, very strong. Lots of movement, but lots of need. Of course, those positions need to be filled. If somebody moves on, every company has to close their books for the month or run their payroll. So very key positions. Help desk roles, still very, very strong out there. We've seen a lot of hiring in higher education recently. There's been a little step back in life sciences and biotech with some of the research funding that's been cut. But one of the nice things I think about New England is there's so many different industries here. So when one thing goes up, something else might step back a little bit, but it ends up being sort of a cycle. Everything's in a cycle that something goes up and hiring surges, and then it might quiet down for a little while, but it always tends to come back.
Where would you urge young people to go career-wise if they're just trying to decide now in terms of looking out to the future?
Such a great question, because one of the things I notice is We talked a little bit about the stress that so many high school students are under
Right.
as far as getting into college and choosing a major is keep your options open. I'm not doing the same job that I thought I was going to be doing when I went to college, and I would guess that probably 85% of people are not. So explore what's out there, try different things. Go on interviews. Sometimes we have recent college grads that say, oh no, I don't want to go on that interview. Go on every interview, because you never know what you might see. And once you step foot and you sort of meet people in the organization, you might end up saying, you know what, this might be the right move for me. I don't even think I knew recruiting was a career when I was getting out of college. I went to law school, and then I decided that I didn't want to be an attorney. It wasn't like it was on Law and Order, and I was like, not for me. And I had a friend who worked in recruiting who said, you know, have you ever thought about this? And I said, I didn't even know recruiting was a career, but I have a lot of student loans and I like to eat. So let me go on the interview, and here I am 20 plus years later. So you just never know.
Do you find that employers these days are open to recruiting the right person with incentives like helping to pay off some of those students' loans, or helping with childcare? Are there trends in that area?
There are, and I think those companies you were mentioning are smart employers. Anything an employer can do to set themselves away from the pack, I think, is very, very important. And those things that you mentioned, those are differentiators.
Yes.
An employer will be much more attractive to a job seeker if they are able to offer things like childcare subsidies, or we talked about work from home already, but even flexible schedules of I need to get my kids to the bus in the morning, or I need to pick up at daycare. Anything an employer can do in that sense to offer somebody, aside from the traditional 8 to 5, we work in an office every day, we punch a clock, I think is a great thing.
What jobs that used to be pretty popular or in demand do you see going away?
It's hard to say right now, because I hear a lot about AI and it's just not at that point yet. Is it moving in that direction? Yes, but I don't think that there's anything that is going away entirely. I think you'll see some manufacturing jobs that might slow back. Obviously, technology has come a long way, so some of those things are more automated. But as far as the types of positions that I place, office positions, I think that that employers are still looking for smart, savvy individuals to do that work. They're not ready to just hand it over to a computer.
So, as someone you've been in hiring and recruiting for so many years, and you've seen just about everything, I would imagine. What would you advise employers to do these days in this economy and in this region to help them kind of recruit the best workforce and, be in it for the long term, give their company the substance and the staying power that it needs?
Be visible, be out there in the community, always be networking. As far as the job seekers I work with, I hear a lot, especially with Gen Z, that they want to work for organizations that give back to the community. So I think that's a very, very important piece of the pie. We're seeing different trends as far as what work-life balance looks like. So I would urge employers that they probably want to take a look at that. Cost of living, it's an expensive place to live. Have to offer competitive salaries. It can't be enough to say we're a great organization that's been around for many years. That's nice, but people still need to pay their bills and raise their families. So having a competitive salary with great benefits is always going to be
It's
important.
such a challenge these days, especially for young people, I think, who come out of school with loans and who are trying to find a place to live, pay off student loans, and make it in the workforce. Is to find a job that will pay them enough to do that.
It is a challenge. The amount of student loans that some students are graduating with is just astronomical.
Oh my God.
Student loan payments that are more than my mortgages.
Yeah, it's nothing like I ever imagined. I would have never done that to myself, but there's no option for a lot of students. They have to take out the loans. Unfortunately, again, we're back to the influence that colleges are having on the entire economy and workforce, whether it be the high cost of going to those colleges or the requirements to get in, which we discussed earlier, and how that's impacting families and students at such young ages all through their life and their school life in order to get into the colleges. So I look at that and I say, is that an opportunity to maybe try to work with these colleges to help really address these economic issues? It seems that a lot of it is stemming from colleges.
I think the one thing that students need to keep in mind is there's great jobs out there no matter what college that you go to. So I think it's very important when considering that is to really examine what they want out of a college, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the one with the biggest name out there. People can build great careers out of all different types of colleges and universities, and that's something that comes from within them. I would encourage anybody to get involved, take the internships, get involved in clubs, take advantage of any learning opportunities at whatever college or university that they go to. And you mentioned earlier the community college system in Massachusetts. And that's a fantastic stepping stone for people that may have budget issues and don't want to take on the burdens of gigantic student loan debt.
I've heard that if you go to a state community college and maintain a 3.0 for the 2 years you're in there, that you are guaranteed admission into any Massachusetts state university at that tuition rate.
Oh, I hadn't even heard that it was at that tuition rate, but
I would
did
double
hear,
check it because I did hear that a while ago. I'm not sure if it still holds true, but I do think that they are guaranteed admission, and starting in a community college may not be as prestigious as some people think it should be or want it to be, but it may be a real jumping off point to bigger and better down the road.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution for anybody, whether it comes to education or a job search. It's so based on the individual. Everybody has to wipe out the preconceived notions of what they think their educational path or their job search should look like, and really just think long and hard about what's best for them.
Right.
A lot of people come in, oh, I want to work for a very large organization, and they go on interviews and they interview with a small nonprofit, and that ends up being the right place. That's why I said earlier that really explore whatever is out there, because there's so many different paths. You don't want to shut yourself off from anything without at least exploring it.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that the opportunities at small companies these days are as prevalent as big organizations, or are you seeing a difference in the size of the organization and their hiring trends as well?
No, I would almost venture a guess that some of the small to mid-sized companies offer more growth potential than some of the larger companies, and they also have the ability, because they don't have these huge global organizations where people end up getting siloed into one specific job, that there may be more opportunities to expand into in a smaller mid-sized organization than a larger one.
That's very helpful, I'm sure. Any parting advice that you'd like to give to viewers about the job market and your observations?
It's an interesting market out there. Stay positive. Looking for a job really can become a full-time job. Consistency is key. Keep applying, track where you're applying, work with recruiters, network within your own networks of people. It might feel weird to reach out to somebody on LinkedIn that you went to high school or college with, but build those networks up, because most people, funny enough, end up finding a job through networking. So you don't know the connections that you meet today, how they may pay off for you at some point down the road. So, but the most important thing is 100% stay positive and enter into it every day with a smile on your face, because things happen for a reason and that right thing will come along.
That's great advice, and you've shared so much valuable information today. I know it's going to be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This
It
has
was
been
a pleasure.
fantastic.
Thank you so much. You know, as we've heard today, the economy and its ripple effects, it's complex and constantly evolving and can be deeply personal. From rising costs to a shifting job market, The challenges we face are very, very real. A special thank you to Dr. Mary Burke and Maura Mann for sharing their valuable insights and helping us better understand what's happening beneath the headlines. Their expertise gives us not only context, but clarity. And these conversations matter because the economy isn't just numbers and charts, it's about people, communities, and the future we're all building together. So thank you for tuning into the Audrey Hall Show, where you will always learn something new.